Hello, everyone, and welcome to NetApp On Air. As always, I'm your host, Nick Howell. Thank you so much for joining us today for yet another episode of NetApp On Air. Before we get started with today's awesome episode and our awesome guests that we've got going, I wanted to get you guys prepped. Some things are coming. We are on the road to Insight already. We're very excited about that, so be sure to keep your ears out for any announcements coming around about Insight very soon. Also, if you want to stay up to date with the latest and greatest, the place to be is come join our Discord community. We've got almost 5,000 members in there. We've got executives, support staff, engineers, and more. And of course, me and Drew hang out in there, so that's a reason to come and join us. But anyway, if you want to keep up with everything that's going on at NetApp and everything that's going on with NetApp On Air, make sure you subscribe to us here on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitch. I see you guys over there, Twitch. What's up? And come join the Discord community, and you can get all of the notifications for every episode of this, as well as ask any questions you might have to some of our support and engineering staff. So netappdiscord.com is the place you want to go, or discord.gg/netapp if you want to get over there. The episode we're doing today is around a product called Cloud Insights. Some of you may have heard of that. Some of you may have not. Some of you that are longtime OGs may be more familiar with a product known as On-Command Insights, or OCI, from about 10 years ago. And it was one of those products where it was a complete observability solution for monitoring, management, and things of that nature. It even had tie-ins and built-in stuff to manage Snap Mirrors, Snap Vaults, Snap Lock, and other things like that. It was a very big install. You needed a team to manage it once it grew to a certain point. So what we decided to do a few years ago was to basically turn it into a managed service. As we were building the cloud portfolio, we realized that it needed an overhaul, and we needed to make it available as a service that we could allow people to just consume, tie to their systems, and bring it all together under one umbrella known as Cloud Insights. So I figured it was about time. We've been doing this show for a little over a year now, and one of the things we haven't really talked about is monitoring. We've talked a lot about Insight, a lot about hardware, a lot about some of our cloud solutions with our cloud provider partners. We have not talked about getting down to some of the basic fundamentals of how do you monitor your stuff. So I went out and I found Miles. I wanted to bring him in and make sure that we brought the right person in to give us a good deep dive overview of everything that there is to know about Cloud Insights, and he even brought demos. So Miles, thank you very much for joining the show. Glad to have you here, and I'm excited for what we're going to talk about today because it's really a long time coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's quite the opportunity, I have to say. And I have to agree, I'm pretty proud of what we achieved with sort of transforming the IP that was On-Command Insight into this way cooler thing called Cloud Insights.
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey to get it because there were so many moving parts to OCI. It was such a, like I was saying, it's such a big, weighty application to manage that it almost required its own dedicated team, and you would usually see it offloaded to different groups that would do this kind of stuff in a NOC, or somebody that was managing the backup and replication schemes would be a part of it. And you would have to have all of this delegation and all of this stuff. Like it was a very big undertaking to really roll it out the right way, especially for larger organizations. We have grossly simplified that with Cloud Insights and how we've put all of that together without really losing a lot of those finer details that it brought to the table.
Yeah, and I think one of the other big things we realized this is again back half a decade at this point, but we realized that our customers had, a lot of challenges around better understanding the workloads themselves. So it started to evolve into something more focused on not just the storage layer, right? So into the compute and better understanding that stuff. And like you said, with the weightiness of it, we needed to make sure that it was easier that when our engineering delivered a new feature set or something of that nature, that it was available and consumable as soon as possible. Why wait a year for the next upgrade cycle? Why wait 6 months? If you can have it truly the next morning, you log in and you see, hey, this is new, fine by me,
Exactly. So how long have you been at NetApp now? How long is this a project that you've been a part of? And when did we start talking about this whole Cloud Insights transition thing?
Yeah, so I can't think when the discussion first started, but I guess, a little background for myself. I've been at NetApp. I'm approaching 11 years now. I started with the company in the U.S. I'm actually based in like the Netherlands now. That whole time, though, I've lived and breathed this group basically. It's had many different names. I had a little bit of focus for those of you out there, that maybe come from the 7-mode era. I used to live and breathe this thing called Data Fabric Manager and a couple other things too. But OCI and then Cloud Insights is very much the thing near and dear to my heart. I think I probably started getting involved with Cloud Insights, I would guess 6 years ago, actually. Yeah. But at that point, I did technical support. I was a field architect. I've worn many hats in the time that I've been with NetApp. And these days I'm in the, I guess you could say, kind of like the outbound or go-to-market product management side of the group.
Nice. Yeah. So where do we start with, pretend I know nothing, pretend I've never managed a NetApp system, pretend I've never done any sort of monitoring with either OCI or Insights, and I'm kind of looking for a universal solution, if you will, to plug into my NOC and kind of look at everything that I've got going on and give me a 30,000-foot view of everything that's going on in my environment. How would you position and describe what Cloud Insights brings to the table for an end user?
Yeah, sure. So I think to kind of start with it helps to understand what is the problem we're trying to solve. So yeah, monitoring is great, right? But monitoring you kind of get with every device you might buy from one vendor or another. Some are more mature than others, so on and so forth. You might introduce automation, you might adopt cloud native technologies, things of that nature. But nonetheless, what we hear from our customers, at least, is that it's essentially the same challenges that appear on repeat. So complexity is nonetheless continues to get worse. Even though we as NetApp try very, very hard to make that simpler, what about all the stuff running on top of it, right? There's risks that you have to manage and so on. And so, for us, our focus, is how do we make the whole IT operations practice simpler? Again, not just giving you speeds and feeds, so to speak, but helping you kind of understand the relationship between different assets that sit in the environment. So yes, you have a storage array that's hosting a bunch of volumes on which there might be LUNs, for example. But wouldn't it be nice to also understand the path across the fabric from which host that's being consumed, on which data store that is being presented to the volume, and which VMs are consuming from that. And that's something we do really, really well. We did that really well in On-Command Insight as well, but that's just further been enhanced with better correlation and stuff. And so with that, understanding that sort of relationship aspect, it means that we can focus a lot more on the proactive side of things. So making it easier to prevent an outage before it ever happens, or to forecast when something's going to become a bottleneck, not just bits and bytes, but also saturation points, for example, before that happens, or when things do go sideways, because they inevitably will. How do you drive that to resolution as quickly as possible? And giving that sort of full context, not just of the assets, but the relationships between them, is kind of like our bread and butter in Cloud Insights.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I remember like a long time ago, we made several acquisitions. I think it was a Corey that brought the Insights name and product into the fold. And we had DFM originally, and then it became the On-Command suite of the marriage of the two of them. And I one of the things that I remember talking about a lot, or that was really relevant at the time, well, you would hear the bully victim kind of discussions about how you'd have a VM that was beating up the storage system for some unknown reason, and you'd have to sort of trace back. You had disk latency there on the screen as an example, and that was usually a culprit. Some batch process was running in Microsoft SQL that was just beating the hell out of the storage system. So it would give you some ability to see, behind the curtains of what was happening with your infrastructure to do a lot of that. So I think that a lot of things have gotten so much more micro-segmented today. I know we're going to talk about Kubernetes at some point, but I think that's a big use case where maybe people don't really know how to monitor Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So I know we're going
Yeah,
to
I
use
mean,
that as an example talking point later on once we get past some of the intro stuff. But
yeah, I have to say, like for that, I mean, it's one thing to monitor it, but I think for lots of infrastructure teams, it's just kind of like a black box.
yeah,
It's a blind spot, so it's hard to know what's consuming or driving demand or whatever it might be. So it is a good example, but what we'll talk about applies across the board. VMware, any hypervisor you choose, so on and so forth.
yeah. So I kind of want to give you the floor and take us through
Sure.
the beginnings and the evolutions and where we are today of Cloud Insights. And let's throw your slides up here. And
Yeah, of course.
is this the right slide or?
I can jump forward one, and then
There you go. Okay,
we'll continue from there.
there you go. The floor is yours,
Yeah,
sir.
yeah, thank you, appreciate it. So I talked about kind of like what is our bread and butter in terms of what Cloud Insights is trying to solve in terms of the pain of just running a modern environment. But I guess when it comes to sort of the outcome that people are able to do with what we provide is giving their end users, whether that be lines of business or particular application groups or a Kubernetes team that you ideally just want to hand the storage to, for example, making that as cloud-like as possible. So the platform, has self-service reporting. It has a API for everything you could possibly need to know about the environment. It allows you to bring in business data from things like CMDB or feed data to CMDB for that matter. And so with that, it really kind of slots into not just the monitoring, but just kind of optimizing and improving so many different workflows across different groups in the environment. So if you think of kind of what does that mean? What does that look like architecturally? Granted, this isn't like an inner workings of Cloud Insights. It kind of flows in this sort of way. So we have this massive catalog on the left. I have a few examples there of probably, I think at this point, it's probably about like 100 different data collectors that we
Wow.
provide out of the box. That just continues to grow. We continue to enhance them as well and add new things. Maybe one vendor adds a couple cool metrics that are super critical for that. Yeah, we make sure to cover that, so on and so forth. But importantly, we also have open ingestion APIs for logs and for metrics and so on. And so all that feeds in this concept that we call data collection, which includes bringing metadata, like I mentioned, about like departments or data centers or regions in the cloud or whatever it might be. That all feeds into what we call a common data model, meaning making it simpler is that a VM is a VM. Doesn't matter if it's called an instance in AWS or I don't know, like a image replica in some other platform or just a virtual machine. All of them are globally queryable. You can tag them all in the same way. A byte is a byte. You don't have to worry about if one platform's base 10 and another's base 2. It's all going to be presented in the same way. In Cloud Insights, we do the math for you. And importantly, it's basically infinitely scalable. I can't think of any case where someone hit the ceiling. And that's because we run it as a SaaS. It's a massive SaaS that we have a dedicated SRE team for who does a fantastic job. And I think our biggest customers at this point, they can even manage like 500 petabytes of storage, tens upon tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of VMs actually. And again, thinking of what you saw a minute ago, all that topology is being calculated and correlated all the time with that. So, but that doesn't mean it only works there. It works just as well in small environments. You have one array and a couple hosts. It works just as easily there. But with that, that's like the bits and bytes that have to come into the platform for it to start cranking out the value for you. And that's where the service side comes in. Because like I said, we do this correlation. We have all kinds of machine learning pipelines in the platform that do things like predict when a shared resource hits a saturation point or give you a forecast on how many days until a resource becomes full and things of that nature, tons of built-in monitors and stuff. And the list kind of goes on, as you might imagine. But importantly, if you look at more the right side, in terms of who ends up using it, usually we kind of see it starts in ops because it kind of helps with the firefighting and making the day-to-day easier. But we see that sort of expand out quite a lot because architects or engineering side can use it to better plan and size what the next phase of the environment should look like. The management and the leadership can better understand who's driving consumption and do things like chargeback and stuff, and the list goes on. But yeah, I mean, that's
quick
kind of
question
what we,
for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Over on the left-hand side, you've got a lot of non-NetApp names over there. We used to refer to these as managed units.
Yeah, indeed.
So Cloud Insights is not just a NetApp tool. I wanted to be a little pedantic about that. We can manage anything out there and bring it into your environment. How does that work? How do we do that?
Yeah, so I have to admit, I like NetApp stuff. Of course, bring your NetApp stuff into it, but it is heterogeneous by design. But basically, the way it works is that you spin out for any, say, single data center or something, one small VM that we call an acquisition unit. And that acquisition unit can run dozens upon dozens of these data collectors. And it will basically remotely pull all of those different pieces. So if you have 10 ONTAP clusters and 3 different vCenters and a little bit of Dell or Pure or whatever it might be, that acquisition unit will go and talk to all of those things, pull that data in, parse it, compress it, so on and so forth, and feed it into the Cloud Insight service. And the best part is even that thing is self-upgrading. So it's really like a set and forget. You don't have to think about, do I have the latest version of that or anything of that nature for it to all work.
Nice. And does it automatically know how to talk to all of those different? Is it kind of like a plugin that's aware of the API stack and how to communicate with all of these other hardware software pieces?
Yeah, and even across versions, right? So if you think of like ONTAP, the API evolves over time. And so we will reach out to a system. It doesn't have, just using ONTAP as the example, and we'll figure out what version it's running, and then we know which dialect of the API to go speak. And we do that for every single storage and compute and cloud platform that we support out of the box.
So it's almost like it's a ambassador piece of software. It's gonna do a translation. It's gonna connect the dots between the two.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe one thing I'll note is, we may get to it a little bit, but on like the Kubernetes piece, it's a little different because Kubernetes doesn't have a very robust remote API. So in that case, we use this little thing called an operator that you place in the cluster. It's just this little service. And it basically still does the same thing. It goes and pulls all the information locally and then compresses, parses, and so on, and then feeds it into the service.
Nice.
But yeah, it's pretty low touch in that sense. And notably, though, like these extra little tidbits here, that is a lot of the open source tooling out there that many people may already use for aggregating metrics from other platforms that maybe we don't provide out of the box. It's still super easy to just feed those straight over to our metric or log ingestion APIs. So you still have that consolidated view of your estate.
We've got a lot of, since you brought that up, we've got a lot of people, and we had them on the show about a year I guys that do Harvest. We wanted I mean, just in your opinion, like, so it does a lot of monitoring as well. Where do you see the line of delineation? Which one should I choose? Is Harvest more kind of ONTAP only situation where Cloud Insights is more ubiquitous, or is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, gotcha. So, I mean, it kind of depends on what your needs are, I think. So, at least in my view, I mean, I'm a little biased because I love Cloud Insights, right? We already talked about that. But basically, where Harvest is really, really good is it can go deep on ONTAP. Way back, actually, you might have even known this or been involved with it, but Harvest used to be able to write out to APIs in on-command insight. So, I mean, if my dream were ever achieved, I would love to see Harvest support the metrics API in Cloud Insights, because at its core, Harvest is a data collector. So it would be one of these things on the left, right? And then it could feed into this whole engine for all these other outputs, essentially.
I smell a collaboration in the works, potentially.
Yeah, that could be a thing, yeah. I like that idea. But at the moment, it is definitely focused on like the deeper side of ONTAP, and I think they maybe support like Storage Grid and stuff too.
Yeah.
Maybe just one other difference though is it just kind of depends on whether you want to have to run it or not. Because with that, then you're managing the storage and stuff. If you don't have to think about any of that, we still get tons of advanced metrics from ONTAP,
Yeah.
but you set and forget with Cloud Insights because it's completely SaaS.
It's a fully SaaS application. You don't have to
Yep.
stand up all of the infrastructure behind the
Yep.
scenes to support it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So, if I think of the key values that I see customers achieve when they use Cloud Insights, it really comes down to three pillars. First is that it just allows them to go faster. They can service more requests in less time because they don't have to go data mine. And that means they can deliver more features and projects without having to think about constraints and bottlenecks in the same way. It helps reduce risk because, again, you can be way more proactive, and importantly, you can troubleshoot problems much, much more quickly because of that correlation component. And also, lots of people, after they've kind of started to see and achieve those two things, because that's usually where people start, they then start looking at, well, how do I improve the economics? Can I use Cloud Insights to optimize my compute estate or find orphan storage and things of that nature? They absolutely can, and they absolutely do. And so that ends up actually translating into real savings as well.
Yeah.
But usually, like I said, people start with the how do I make the day-to-day easier so my team can operate more efficiently?
Yeah. So a couple of things I want to touch on right here.
Yeah.
With the reduced risk, the first thing I'll say is that think in the context of if you're a day-to-day ops administrator, if you're managing a NOC, if you're an operator in a NOC, if you're an SRE, you need these dashboards constantly. Your ability to custom tailor these dashboards to your environment is paramount. Not only can you structure permissions around who can do what to what, but you can also make read-only versions of those to report up. And to me, that's one of the beautiful benefits of this because it's all included. It's all part of the whole thing. You can make a special CIO dashboard that's read-only that will give your CIO an at-a-glance of how the environment's operating, how many tickets have closed, how many things are working, all of that stuff. How much storage capacity are you using for budget planning 3 years out, things like that. All of that becomes incredibly valuable when it comes to the improved economics and toils column there. The one thing I wanted to touch on as well in the middle is the reduced risk. We did fold in one of our little acquisitions we made in the past few years. We ended up calling Cloud Secure, but we decided ultimately to fold that into Cloud Insights very strategically because of how it could do a lot of the things that we're doing with autonomous ransomware protection on Box now with ONTAP. And it's a similar situation that we're doing there. So can you touch on that kind of the behavioral model that we're doing within Cloud Insights and how we're triggering snapshots and stuff? Because I think that's a perfect example of the reduced risk as well. Not just about incidents, but the I don't want to call it. We're doing some machine learning behind the scenes.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, it's more than some in that case. Yeah, so what's really cool about that, that's a component we these days call storage workload security. And basically, it interfaces with ONTAP. It's a feature only for ONTAP. It ingests via this fancy, fun protocol called F-policy all of the user interactions that occur on a file system. But we pump that into a processing pipeline, a set of pipelines actually, and basically learn what is typical behavior, not just for shall we say, like at the block level, what you'll have locally, but per user in the environment on every observed asset that is being detected. And so that means we can detect, like 0-day attacks that there isn't a known profile for example, because we can detect it is that regular behavior for that user or not. And also we can automatically snapshot, of course, when we detect that. We also ingest when an autonomous ransomware protection event has been detected too. So we use that to kind of enhance or enforce that analysis. And importantly, though, we can actually outright stop that user from being able to do any more damage on that file system. And so the cool thing about there, if you think of defending your estate, sort of like I was talking to one of my teammates about this a couple of weeks ago. You treat protecting your data kind of like a castle. You're going to have walls, you're going to have a moat, you're going to have a drawbridge, so on and so forth. The workload security piece is very much like the people or the guards enforcing at the gate who goes and who doesn't go, because it is aware of every person passing through that gateway, if that makes sense. So very user focused. It's that sort of like most user aware component. If you think of what you can use to protect your ONTAP estate.
I love that, because I think the ONTAP side of it, and I hope I'm not oversimplifying. Forgive me, Keith, Baxter, everybody, for if I am. But I feel like there's an element of the on-box ARP that is kind of very specifically looking at known file extensions that are known to be bad through a block list that's updated through versions of ONTAP. And there's definitely some F policy work going on in there as well to do some modeling around behavioral, like, hey, that volume hasn't been accessed or written to in 6 months, but it just started getting flooded. Snapshot, just in case. There's a similar but different thing going on with the storage workload security that's happening in Cloud Insights, where it's more based around user activity than. So am I going over that the right way? Am I differentiating those two correctly?
No, yeah, I would completely
Cloud
agree with that.
Insights is more like user based than hard file block level based.
The tool set in ONTAP is going to be looking at the entropy of the files themselves, or of the data at the block level. And you're absolutely right. It has block lists for file extensions and things of that nature. So that covers all the fundamentals, and that's super important to, if possible, leverage all of it. But then if you don't have something that is very good at being user aware, or you want to be able to recover more quickly or stop an attack in its tracks when it does, because there is the chance that it will hit your ONTAP environment, that's where the workload security piece comes into play, because it knows which user, it knows what files they touch, it knows even across different clusters, even because, again, it's one pipeline. Learning what that user is doing across the whole storage estate, and also auto snapshotting and stuff. So you're right on the nose for that.
I always look at it as we talk about ONTAP and your storage system being the last line of defense. And I feel like at the very bottom foundational level is those block lists and block level scanning with F policy on the storage system. But a lot of the attacks are going to be vectored via users, whether that's a breach, whether that's a rogue admin, whether that, whatever it might be, the vector that it's coming in is going to be from a user. So for Cloud Insights to have the ability to not only kind of inherit some of the knowledge and activity of F policy from ARP, but also model around the end user to be able to prevent some of that stuff, I think is a 1-2 punch that I haven't really seen anywhere else in the industry.
Yeah,
I've spent a lot of time about the last 2 years just drowning myself in ransomware stuff, because it's the thing. AI obviously for the last year, but the ransomware has kind of taken the world by storm, and I think we are recognizing that, and we're addressing it in the most aggressive way we possibly can with both Cloud Insights and ONTAP.
Yep, have to agree.
All right, so I didn't mean to rat hole us there, but I wanted to stop and talk about some of that. I didn't want to miss out on the ability to talk about the storage workload protection stuff there.
Totally. Yeah. So from there, that's really all I wanted to cover when it comes to sort of introduction to what is it Cloud Insights does across our customer base. It's worth noting, before I go deeper into specifically what about the Kubernetes landscape, just as an example, that you mentioned this concept earlier of managed units. If you're wondering, how do I go use it? There's a free trial out there. It's 30 days at the start, I think. There's a basic edition that's free for all ONTAP users for monitoring their storage, and I think their VMware as well. But then, all of the more advanced stuff comes with a premium option. But when you do the trial, it tells you how many of these managed units are needed, and then you have an idea of what's actually going to cost at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think what would be beneficial is for anybody, start out with your NetApp systems. Start out with the basic tier and with your NetApp systems, and then if you let the collectors go out and kind of scan your environment and see what it discovers, then you get a good idea of what your inventory is. This is all still completely free, by the way. You can and then you go and you license what you need to from a managed units perspective, and you can take it from there. There's nothing saying you have to sign. It's not binary. It's not
No,
all or none.
no,
Like you
not
can
binding, and
choose.
importantly, no ceiling on the trial. So when you first sign up, you can go discover everything if you want. At the end, you can say, I just want to keep the on-top stuff in there if you so choose. But
Right.
in many cases, as you might imagine, people really like what they find.
Yes. There are the things that it can uncover that you may not be aware of, or the things that you're able to see now, with a microscopic viewpoint down into the depths of your infrastructure,
Hmm.
like things you wouldn't have considered before and then you can build reporting around it, you can build dashboards around it, you can build alerting around it. So for all of those kinds of things, it's absolutely massive. Let me throw your slides back up here real quick and
Yeah, of course.
let's talk about some Kates.
Yeah, Kate's, oh man, where to begin? So Kubernetes.
It was a project started by Google,
Yeah,
and a couple of
let's
guys at
do a
Google
quick
that were
little
called
history
Borg.
lesson. Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
So, I mean, let's be real here. So, a couple years ago, Kubernetes was largely run by, I guess what you could kind of say is like the line of business. It was the side project of some team that didn't want to wait on IT, and so they owned this piece of infrastructure, and they had some cool applications they were building on top of it. Fast forward to now, that is not the case anymore. It is
Mm,
very much becoming the standard, at least by what I'm seeing in both small companies and large enterprise. It is becoming sort of the standard for the next generation of virtualized workloads. But it is hard. Kubernetes is hard because it isn't just Kubernetes. It requires using way too many other tools to actually administer it, administer how to manage the workloads you run on it. It requires a lot of skills, both for those other tools and Kubernetes. And the weird thing to me is that even though it is so much more focused on automation, which should remove human error substantially, the main challenge I see from people is still unexpected changes drive problems in applications or availability of the infrastructure. So the story seems to be the same, just rehashed in a different way,
right.
so to speak.
Whether it's a
But
networking config change, whether it's a push to production on a Friday afternoon that nobody wants,
yep.
it's all of those things are usually unexpected. Um, I
Yep.
think that's
Even
where
if
this really
they
comes into
reviewed
play.
it and it went into a pull request or something, it still can happen.
Sure.
Don't believe me, and it does.
Don't
Um,
commit on Friday afternoon, guys.
yeah,
That's really what it comes down to.
yeah. Wait till Saturday, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So when I think of like what do I hear from different people that have to deal with this estate, the management is just worried about the complexity bogging people down, slowing them down. If they're running in the cloud, the cost is a big concern too. On-prem, maybe not as much of a concern, at least not yet. Developers have this challenge that they need to know enough about Kubernetes, which again, Kubernetes is just another type of infrastructure. They need to know enough of how to make their application run, but they don't want to have to live and breathe this other piece of infrastructure. So they really are kind of pushing to either people in their DevOps team or this new-ish function that's now being called platform engineering for people to deliver Kubernetes as a service, essentially. So you have those two other groups. Platform engineers are really focusing on what is the developer experience. That means running Kubernetes and providing, what it delivers as a service to those users, but oftentimes also providing portals for them to more easily see the health of their applications, or giving them pre-built frameworks, what they call golden paths for maybe templates of databases or something like that. But nonetheless, they have this challenge of how do I make sure this service is stable and reliable, but also how do I go fast enough that I'm delivering the new features and the capabilities that the developers really need to actually impact the success of the business, essentially. So
The
that's kind of
dirty
what we
secret
hear
is we
on
went through this
repeat.
exact
Yeah.
same thing 12 years ago with VMware. 12. I
Wait.
mean, it was we were
No.
serving right. We were
Yeah.
serving resources to application teams
Yeah.
and developers teams. That's
Yeah.
really that's the crux of it. Is we were doing it with
Yeah.
VMs before. Now we're just doing it with little more micro segmented
Yeah,
infrastructure.
exactly.
Right?
And it's it's more efficient then. It also means the best part is it's more portable and more
Yep.
flexible, but nonetheless, it's still complicated, right?
Yep.
So we hear this stuff on repeat everywhere we go. Essentially, it's not that people don't know how to do Kubernetes; it's just that it is hard.
Yep.
So we had this idea. Cloud Insights has been around for a while. It's really, really good at helping people understand their full storage landscape across every platform they may have, their full compute landscape, their cloud compute landscape, and it can correlate all these things. Kubernetes is the next generation of that. So how do we make sure that we can provide value as our customers are moving their workloads into Kubernetes to be able to do so? And so that was exactly what we set out to go build, and I think we did build it, honestly. So now, instead of you having to go look at your metrics in Grafana, doing a bunch of command line stuff in kubectl or kubectl, for those of you that disagree with me, looking at your events in Kibana.
I'm definitely a
trying
cube cuddle guy. I like cuddling my cubes.
Okay. We'll have to argue about that next time we meet in person.
Okay.
Their change management in GitHub, for example, the builds in Jenkins, the topology and Istio, or whatever service mesh they use. And you don't have to even know what a service mesh is. It's just another thing for managing networking in Kubernetes. That is a lot of different places to have to go context switch to understand what is going on in the environment. So we went and made sure that Cloud Insights can consolidate visibility there. That doesn't mean we're doing Git. Your source control is still your source control. But if we can show you the changes that are applied in Git and put that into context in reference to when did something become degraded, for example, that's huge. And it saves a huge amount of time.
It's visibility into the causality of something that you're being alerted on.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. So when I think of sort of the foundations that we had to go build to make that happen, the first was that we need to make the monitoring of Kubernetes as straightforward as possible for ops. And so that meant we go gather, from not just the nodes, but also the pods, the containers inside the pods, all the deployment configuration stuff in Kubernetes. We understand the history of reliability, the saturation points, the health, so on and so forth of all those different assets. We correlate those. We even can map. I think we're the only platform on the planet that can map this construct in Kubernetes called a PV, or a persistent volume, to a backend externally provided storage resource like a LUN or like an NFS export, for example. And we can actually map those two and provide you the full topology across that, from container to pod to deployment to node to PV to LUN or share. No one can do that. And so we were like, that's a really good start, but that doesn't get into the complexity in the environment. That's that sort of like
Right.
that in to out sort of relationship. So that's where we went and did this next thing. We built something called the workload map. And we leveraged a technology that's been around in the Linux kernel for a long time, actually, like I think probably 20 years or something, called eBPF, which is the extended Berkeley packet filter. That basically goes and does packet traces on every single container, for lack of a better description, but without the performance overhead that you might expect from going and doing that. And we take all that stuff, we enrich it to build you a map of each individual workload that sits in the environment, which external volume it is consuming, and what is the client side performance that particular app might see when it's writing to your ONTAP system, for example. And that was step 2, essentially. Make it easier to understand that topology. And if there's this big chain of services in Kubernetes, how do I isolate which one's the problem? Because usually when people say, hey, I have high latency, they're like, hey, it's the storage. And how do we get away with that? I mean, it's something I would love to never hear again, but nonetheless, it still comes up. So
it's usually the network, but
it is. Yeah. But somehow people think it's the storage, don't they?
It's always DNS. No, one of the things you commented on there with eBPF, like, I think that, if I'm not mistaken, that's already being done by the Linux kernel anyway. We're just taking advantage of that information
because
that's
it's
already,
present.
that's where we get the lack of overhead, or
Yeah.
there's no additional overhead to
Yeah,
do. The
because
kernel's
it's
been doing
present
this stuff
there,
already
but you
anyway.
have to tell the kernel, hey, I want you to present this data to me in this way. And
Right.
then we still have to go do a whole bunch of number crunching in the service itself. And that's where the machine learning comes into play again, to do this sort of like correlative analysis. But the raw data is there on each node. It's just a matter of stitching that together and making it into something usable
Yeah,
in reality.
digestible.
Yes, absolutely. So then, from there, we're like, okay, so we have the fundamentals of state and health and whatnot. We understand the relationships. Now we need to get to the causation piece. And so that's where we started looking at, we need to be able to see every time someone changes a definition in the Kubernetes landscape. So say modifying the configuration of a persistent volume, which, as I mentioned, is a storage resource provisioned, provided by an external array, for example, or modifying the what you would call the limits on a container, which is essentially the provisioned CPU and memory in Kubernetes terminology. So you see, it's all the same challenges that we saw in VMware, just with new terms and new words.
Yeah.
But being able to correlate when someone makes that change to, did that generate an alert, and more importantly, what if it generated an alert on a different workload that this workload talks to? And that's where we got to finally, that we can even do that. A change happens on workload A, and we can see how that manifests as a negative impact, for example, on workload B or C, who talks to workload A. And I think, honestly,
what is it? Unrealized dependencies or something like that.
yeah,
Things
yeah,
that
yeah.
you don't think about. Unknown unknowns.
Because people have their chart of how, like their architectural diagram of how all the pieces should fit together in the Kubernetes landscape or in any landscape in reality. But developers can deploy and make changes on the fly all the time. Is that architectural diagram up to date versus what's happening in real time? That's always a bit of a debate. But that's where the workload map helps, because we see the live feed, and that means we can do the correlation in real time as that stuff is as it happens.
Love it.
Yeah. So the last thing we did, this is more on like the proactive side. So you think of those three pillars I was talking about: going faster, being able to minimize risks, and also improving economics. And that was the last one we wanted to go focus in on, is to take this machine learning that our data science team is super good at building new capabilities for, and allowing people to understand how to better size each individual workload that's running in Kubernetes. And so maybe that's not as much of an issue for people that are, say, providing the storage to the Kubernetes landscape. The people that have to run the cluster, that's a big deal for, because they just usually give this sandbox out to a developer. The developer is going to ask for as much as they possibly can, because well, if it's bigger, it's faster, right? And therefore, I won't have any problems. Meaning your scale's all messed up, workloads can't be placed on certain nodes, so on and so forth. And so it's read-only. It uses machine learning, though, to identify what is the best fit. And importantly, it strikes the right balance. It has different optimization strategies, essentially, to show to an user, well, if this is a dev environment, here's how you can run the workload as cheaply as possible. But if this is like a super critical, tier 0 app, here's what you should provision those limits as to ensure maximum possible stability. And it does all that, automatically. It's just there as another time series of data that you can consume as in dashboards or pump out in queries or something to an end user.
It's Kubernetes Tetris.
Yeah, I like that. Kubernetes Tetris. Totally right.
You're putting the right ones into the right worker nodes, and right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, slide-wise, that is the fundamentals. We can definitely take a look at a demo environment.
Okay.
I think I told you before, though, I had one cluster. I think it got deleted or someone shut off. I think I have another one. I'm going to go check here really quick just to see if it's around. So let me just
live demos are always good. Recorded is understandable if necessary. But it would
let's
always,
see here.
one of my favorite things is just pulling up an environment with a customer and just driving around in the environment, letting them take the wheel, handing them the mouse, letting them kind of get a feel for it. That's why we invest so heavily in our lab on demand. We want our customers and our partners to be able to do all of that stuff. That's why you do hands-on labs at events, at larger trade shows. Like all of that stuff is valuable just to get some stick time with something like that. So anything we can do here to show what we might have. Is that one ready to share? You good to go?
Yeah, I think I found I have one cluster left, so I think we're good here. Yeah.
All right. So what are we looking at here? Is this the first kind of entryway? Is this a particular workload?
Yeah, so this is basically where I think most people, if they want to understand if something's unhealthy or not in the Kubernetes landscape, in Cloud Insights, this is just in a little section called Explore and Workloads. It's just a list of every workload in the environment. Some of these might be databases. Some of them might be like this one's a front end, so that's like a web UI or something. But importantly, it showcases to you the most important things you need to know. So is it up or not? Does it have running the same amount of running pods, or that would be like replicas essentially, versus what we expect? Is there an issue with the underlying compute and storage? So that might be VMware, that might be the Kubernetes node itself, that could be a backend storage array, whatever it might be. We calculate all of that, of course. Same thing on network. And importantly, like I said, what about, were there any recent changes that have occurred? So that all gets surfaced just like in one at-a-glance view. But when you see something's wrong, like this, again, this is an external facing web app that says I had 2 critical issues. Maybe I want to go, investigate what's wrong there. And so that's kind of where you can click in. You can start to dive into what's gone sideways here, which we can totally do. But yeah.
Nice. So from a Kubernetes standpoint, where is that pretty diagram you had on the slide where you can kind of get a 1,000-foot view of your clusters and stuff like that?
That is this guy right here. That is the workload map. And actually, because I see, it said compute and storage critical and network, that's a great way to start to just kind of understand who's doing what, who interacts with the this particular workload. So I can mouse over the front end. It's going to draw out these lines for me. I can see there are different thicknesses as well. And at the moment, that's by bytes. But if I want, just because I did see it was a network issue, I can put this on latency, for example. And you'll see it's changed who it's highlighting. So I see the biggest latency is to this other service called Catalog. I don't really know anything about Catalog. I know front end is like an external web UI. Catalog sounds like some kind of a database, though. Yeah. So if I want to understand more about, well, what the heck is going on with Catalog, I could just take out the filter for front end. And then I'm going to see everything in this namespace. And a namespace is like a project, for lack of a better word. Right. So I have front end, I have Catalog. I see that's actually, it does have, 34 milliseconds of latency. If I look at the underlying storage, though, it's 0.34 milliseconds. So I have no issues there. That's good. No storage issue today. No issue with underlying MongoDB either. 3.8, maybe not the best, but this is just sitting on kind of small instances. I think in the cloud, I can't remember which provider we have this one on. But either way, that means something's going sideways with this Catalog service. So I could go the traditional route of, well, let's go get the logs. Let's go look at the configuration of Catalog, so on and so forth. But with Cloud Insights, I can kind of bypass all of that. So what I'll do is I'll just click on front end, and I'm going to instead open the change analysis. That thing I was talking about, kind of being able to see what has gone sideways here. And I see a couple things like, high login latency, things of that nature. Not much else. So no one's changed any configuration data here. Like I don't see any greens for like deploys or something of that nature. And I do see, though, Catalog does have a bunch of changes and alerts. Order, these have been auto-correlated, by the way, has 18 changes and no alerts. So I'll just click on Catalog because I saw that was the latency.
Uh-oh.
And I see this guy. Yeah, something's going on here.
Oh, that was cool. So you can zoom in on a particular time
frame. Yeah. So I can zoom. I can also just like click in to one of these. It'll auto-filter the UI and stuff.
Beautiful.
Making it just super easy to start diving into the problem though. So if I look at this one, I have this thing, CPU throttling. I have some attributes were changed. I have more high latency. But essentially, when this deploy happens, this other sequence of events is happening on the catalog. So we have CPU throttling get introduced, and then it looks like probably I bet they did a rollback here because of this error or something, and then it disappears as a problem. So if I want to know what has gone sideways with why this happened, I can just click on this particular item, this change, and I can see which specific attributes were modified. I can also see the correlated events. So that's coming actually out of the logs in Kubernetes about when I'm a little zoomed in here, but basically I can see when the replica was scaled up or down, did it try and mount a PV, that sort of thing. That's all visible here without you having to go mine through thousands of lines of logs. We pare that down to just the 5 or the 6 or the 15 log events that actually matter in this case. And most importantly, if I want to know how to go fix it, I can see this diff, and the diff is going to show me line by line in the configuration file of this workload who modified which components, basically. So I can see that the CPU, the limits, like I said, which is like the ceiling of what Kubernetes will allow it to consume, were modified from 900 millicores to 700. So not a huge change. We're talking like 0.2 cores, not a lot, but enough that you saw Kubernetes was having to throttle the workload. And throttling means that service can no longer service any new requests. So if the front end is making API calls to catalog saying, hey, I need to get this piece of information from the database or so on and so forth, catalog can only respond and handle so many because it's been throttled off by Kubernetes, essentially, by design. But nonetheless, the app owner probably didn't mean for that to happen. Maybe they were just trying to be more efficient or something of that nature. So, I can go restore this. I could go roll it back in Git. Actually, if I was using, Astra, I could just go do a recovery from like a backup or something as well. There are many different ways you could go about recovering that, but this helps kind of understanding which specific line, because maybe there are 50 lines modified, but this way you can go and compare, well, which one's tying to the behavior? And that's what we can see here, essentially.
That's amazing that you can bring in all of the logs like that and basically filter them down to the specific event and time frame that's where things happened. It seems so simple on the surface, and it's one of those things like, why did it take this long to get that?
It does, but it's because it's so many different sources of data. There's so much normally human cognitive load that has to be invested in making that correlation because it's just human interpretation. But if you put enough developers on it, they can go figure out how to do that in a automated way, essentially.
So do you have any other infrastructure set up here, or is this just a Kubernetes sort of demo site?
In this case, this is just one cluster. Maybe just one other thing. Well, let's see.
Oh, and that's the other thing I was going to ask before you move away from Kubernetes is working with the cloud providers. If you're using their managed services, the EKSs, AKSs, GKEs of the world, how does that change how this works?
It doesn't really change it at all, actually. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, we have customers that run in every cloud, or just one cloud, or on-prem, or a mix of any of them. Our goal is basically, if it's Kubernetes, we want to be able to support it. So I have customers on GKE, Anthos, AKS, EKS, OpenShift, Rancher. I'm sure there are things I'm missing out there. That's the most common ones. Self-built, Kubernetes the hard way. The list goes on. But yeah, that doesn't really matter for us at all.
We're talking to Kubernetes, not exactly the cloud provider at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
So you just deploy our operator in the cluster. In fact, you can see it here. I have this little thing called NetApp monitoring. This is just our own little set of small resources. You'll see they're using like tiny amounts, 3 nanocores, 19 nanocores. So super, super lightweight.
Is this just a
And
little
that
sidecar that lives on each of the nodes, or how is that working?
It's not a sidecar that can add up in terms of that can actually end up using a lot of
Yeah.
resource. So we basically have these different things. A
Oh,
daemon
it's a daemon
set,
set.
we have one running on every node. A replica set, we only need one or two, for example.
Okay.
Deployments, usually we only need one or two copies as well. But each of these are just a small little piece that is purpose built to do one thing really well, right? Whereas, yeah, I mean, sidecars, we'd have to like get into every app, which there is a place for that. But when you're trying to do what we're doing, you don't have to go that route, thankfully.
Yeah.
So that helps quite a bit.
Nice.
I was gonna say though, you asked about other stuff. So like here, these PVs I was talking about, these are actually all being served by a CDO cluster. I don't know if it's an HA or not, but if I like go look at this volume, I don't know if anyone's like annotated this or something, but I can see, overall IOPS. I can see how it's been tagged by different users in the environment. And if I scroll down, let me just see, I see them automatic mapping to the PVs here, which cluster or set of clusters is consuming from that FlexVol, which pods are running on it and stuff. And of course, we do this with VMs and stuff too. But it helps to be able to mesh that with Kubernetes as well, because it's hard.
Exactly, and I think that's the button on all of this, the ribbon to tie on all of it is that that's beautiful. By the way, just seeing this all of these collectors.
The list goes on, my friend.
it's there was something like I thought I heard like 500 of them at some point, managed units or something like that. I just can't remember what it was. If you include all the different NetApp ones and all the different variations for vendors and stuff like that, it's an uncountable number of different collectors.
Yeah, because I mean, how many different platforms, how many different ONTAP versions are in ONTAP? Now think about the fact we do that for all of these IBMs, all of these Hitachis, all of this Dell EMC, all this different stuff across AWS and Azure. It's a huge undertaking. The team that manages that does an amazing job. With just being able to support such a broad base of platforms.
So, guys, head out to what's the best way for them to get started with Cloud Insights? Is there a particular website to go to? If they want to start up and try the free one, do they just go to their support account and start it from there? Is it cloud.netapp.com? Where's the best way to get started?
If they go to the main BlueXP website, there's a button for Cloud Insights. There's a start free trial button, and then you basically you're good to go. You got 30 days. If you're actually using it, I think you end up getting an option to self-extend at the end as well. So if you're waiting on someone in networking to open a firewall for you, don't panic. You have some flexibility there. But yeah, it's out there.
And as always, like you said, the basics of versions available for you to look at any of your NetApp stuff that you may have in place.
Absolutely.
That's available to everybody. It's just about the amount of history that we keep, I think, is the one dial there that you can't really turn up. Yeah. Well, guys, there you go. Cloud Insights. Miles, thank you so much for giving us that overview and having the conversation with me and giving us a demo of how it works. I feel like we could probably spend another 2 hours going through that.
Let me know.
You know what? Listen, I will definitely take you up on that, because I think there's an opportunity here with Cloud Insights that I don't feel like we NetApp have fully taken advantage of, and touting Cloud Insights as the one sort of universal monitoring solution that can look at your entire infrastructure, your entire cloud footprint, and everything in between, and help you take all of that data in and build actionable information out of it. In a very simple to digest kind of way. I don't think we've done a good enough job about highlighting that. So I'm happy I got to have you on finally. It's one of those that I've been kicking down the can for a little while, and that's on me. But I'm definitely glad we finally got you on here and got the demo of everything. There's so much more to show with Cloud Insights. There's so much more for you guys to discover with Cloud Insights. So go do the demos, get the basic edition, and give it a shot. And Miles hangs out in our Discord, by the way.
Yeah, I'm out there.
So if you have any questions about it after today's show, if you're watching the replay, come jump in Discord. There's a dedicated channel called On-Air Chat. You can ask questions in there for Miles. There's an entire observability discussion channel. There's a support channel in there, all kinds of stuff. So I just put it under the Blue XP support channel if you have any questions, and I'll make sure Miles gets it, and he's able to help you out there. So anything that you'd like to leave the audience with, Miles, before we get out of here?
Don't be afraid to try it. I think that's the best part of Cloud Insights is that, what you saw, it's all customizable too. So if you're like, there's this other team that they have this requirement, I'm sure you can do it. You know, so it's, I'll leave it at that. I'll be at KubeCon next week. Find me there if you're there.
Nice. So come by the NetApp booth, come find Miles. You can't miss that hair and beard. It's magnificent.
Hard to miss.
Love it.
Yep.
Yes. Another fellow beard. We had Ingo on last week, and now we've got you on this week.
Yeah.
The band of beards, the beards of brothers, whatever we want to call it. All right, Miles. Thank you so much for joining us. I got a few closing comments, and I'm gonna get out of here. So take care.
Great,
Thank you very much, and we'll see you in
Appreciate
Discord.
it.
Well, guys, there we go. Thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody on Twitch, everybody on YouTube, everybody on LinkedIn, and those of you hanging out in Discord, thank you so much for joining us today. As I said before, we are getting into trade show season beginning next month. I believe the first one of the year is going to be Google Cloud Next, so we got that one to look forward to. As Miles said, KubeCon is next week, actually, so that's probably the first one of the year that I'm aware of. And then we're kicking off things going crazy. We're going to get into Cisco Live, VMware Explorer. I have to say now, I'm not allowed to say VMworld anymore. And then we're going to get into all kinds of good stuff as we head towards Insight. One note I want to start reminding people of earlier this year. Insight traditionally has been at the end of October. I want to remind everybody, and I'm probably going to do this every episode or once a month, it is not in October anymore. We moved it up a month. It is at the end of September. Plan accordingly. Make sure that you've got that last week of September. I believe it's the 23rd through the 25th. So make sure you've got that. I want to start prepping you guys now so that it's not a surprise in August when it's going to be a month away instead of the end of October. So end of September, Insight this year, back at the MGM still in Vegas. That's all we can tell you for now. But stay tuned. More info soon. Come get in Discord. It is the place to be. Follow us everywhere, all over the socials. You guys know how to do this stuff by now. I'm Nick Howell. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you guys next time.